And it's emerged today that a close friend of a government minister wrote a crucial report that Labour has repeatedly used to justify its VAT raid on private schools. So Matthew Pennycook, a minister in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, was reportedly the best man at the wedding of Luke Sibieta, who authored the Institute for Fiscal Studies report that found the policy could raise more than £1 billion for the Treasury. Well, it comes as this unlikely alliance now of independent schools, teaching unions and tax experts joined forces yesterday to heap pressure on the government to delay this tax raid on private schools amid fears that it could wreak havoc with kids' education. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has also been branded divisive and stupid for a recent post on social media. She said, our state schools need teachers more than private schools need embossed stationery. Our children need mental health support more than private schools need new pools. Our students need careers advice more than private schools need AstroTurf pitches. Well, with me now is Geoff Hoon, former Labour Minister. Geoff, thank you very, very much.
Good evening, Patrick.
How are you? So it looks as though maybe Labour have been at it again, Geoff, that all is not as it seems, that this report that gave them a glowing response for their policy turns out to be written by, well, shock horror, you know, a mate.
Well, first of all, I've looked at the report and it isn't glowing. There's lots of criticism, actually, of the policy. It's a fairly balanced report. And I think those that are criticising the author are playing the man rather than the ball. The issue is this report on its own merits a proper consideration of this policy? And I can't see that there's anything wrong with the report. Whatever the relationship between its author and the minister seems to be wholly irrelevant if people are saying actually the report is well balanced, which they are.
Well, isn't the main thing wrong with it that it's just factually inaccurate because it's not going to raise £1 billion?
Well, I understand that the report talks about raising between 1.3 and 1.5 billion pounds, so that seems to be in the right ballpark. It's around the figure that the government have been talking about.
Yeah, but the government, I think, are quite wrong about this, aren't they? I mean, where's the evidence it is going to raise this amount of money? I mean, they're saying that we need it for more teachers. Well, I think it's one teacher for every 4 state schools, which, given the idea that, you know, several tens of thousands of children are now going to be pumped into the state school system in high pockets in certain areas, it's not going to be enough, is it? It doesn't seem to really add up.
I'm not sure that that is the calculation that is borne out. I also have just read the House of Commons report on this proposal, and it talks about 3 to 7% perhaps dropping out, that very uncertain figure. After all, it's quite clear that fees in private education have been going up substantially in recent years. That doesn't seem to have affected decision by parents to continue to pay for their children.
Well, it is affecting it now, though, isn't it? Because there's 10,000 fewer children in private schools ahead of Labour's VAT tax policy. So things have changed. That has changed. And can I ask, why does Labour want to look so bitter about all of this, do you think?
I don't think it's a question of bitterness. It's really a question of principle. And I'm glad that you've got around to that, because the reality is that this affords a tax break to private education, and the taxpayer is subsidising private education. Now, there might be an argument for that, but it isn't essential. And I would have thought that most people would accept that if VAT is applied to a whole range of services, it should be applied equally to fees for private education. I can't see anything wrong with that in principle.
But aren't parents who send their children to private school just paying twice? Therefore, your argument completely falls down. They're paying for everybody else's education through tax, and then they pay for their own child's education through paying for it themselves, Geoff.
But that's a choice they make, and that's a choice that should be...
No. So they're paying twice, aren't they? So they are paying twice. So this idea that they're getting a tax break, Geoff, and that everyone else is paying for is complete rubbish, isn't it?
No, it's not, because actually, if you look at the VAT rules, the exemption for private education is set out in the legislation. If that exemption was not there, then they would have to pay VAT.
Right. So look, Geoff, someone who goes to Eton or, I don't know, Marlborough or wherever super poshos, turbo poshos send their kids, right? They're not bothered, are they? They just crack on. They pay 40 grand a term or whatever it is for little Hugo and Horatio to go and crack on and have a great time. But people who've really had to scrimp and save to send their kids to a £8,000 or £10,000 a year private school who now can't do it, they're the ones that suffer. And I'll ask you the same question that I asked our mate Sean Simon before, which is this not socialism in a nutshell, Geoff? You don't care if the poor get poorer, as long as the rich get poorer as well. It's the politics of envy.
Well, to repeat the point I made a few minutes ago, the reality is that fees for private education have been increasing year on year. well above the rate of inflation. That doesn't appear to have had any impact on the numbers of people sending their children to private education. It's a choice those parents make. It's a choice for them. No one's interfering with their choice. It simply doesn't seem right in principle that they should get a tax break, a subsidy from the taxpayer for doing so.
OK, all right. And this idea now that, you know, oh, these private schools, you know, they need it more, they need embossed stationery, etc. Do you not think that's a bit needlessly divisive? I mean, the irony is if she'd have written that down, she probably would have used embossed stationery from the House of Commons, no?
I think the reality is that we need to focus on the principle, which is what I've been trying to do, and you've encouraged me to do that.
Yeah, because I don't see what the principle is, Joe. I can't see what the principle is. The principle is you look at some people who've really scrimped and saved to send their children to a private school because they've made a decision that they would quite like their child to maybe be a bit safer at school and do all that, and the Labour Party have come in and gone, screw you, you're going to go to Stab City Comprehensive.
That's not what the Labour is saying at all. There is no reason why parents cannot continue to send their children into private education. The reality is, for the moment, they are getting a subsidy from the taxpayer. And I think it's important to emphasise that without the exemption already built into the legislation passed by Parliament...
Did you go to private school?
VAT would be payable.
Did you go to private school?
Take it away. Sorry.
Did you go to private school out of interest?
I went to a private school, yes.
Right, yeah. And was that nice for you? It set you up nicely in life, didn't it, Geoff? That was great.
Well, the reality was I got a scholarship paid for by the local
great, but then this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because the reason they can give out scholarships, Geoff, is because they're well funded and they put a bit of money in the bank. You probably wouldn't have been able to go if this had been the case. Goodness knows where you would have ended up. Although obviously you are incredibly bright and genuinely, no doubt, would have done very well anyway. But my point is this: you know, it helps people on bursaries and stuff, Geoff, doesn't it?
I don't think that's the same issue, is it? Because the reality is, I mean, my scholarship was 100%, so my parents didn't pay anything, so they wouldn't have paid anything extra anyway. And I think the important exemption that the government have indicated in relation to children with educational difficulties, I think that's quite right. I think there are ways of looking at other assistance to those who are less well off, who are struggling to pay fees.
All right, mate. Look, thank you very much. I do always appreciate your time, Geoff. Lovely stuff. Take care. Geoff Hoon there, former Labour Minister.